Hello everyone, I'm Mohammed Tavakuri, the inaugural director of the Lahore and Tehran Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you to the Institute's dual delivery lecture series featuring Professor Iftikhar Dadi of Cornell University. We are grateful to Professor Dadi for accepting our invitation to join us here in Toronto. This is one of our very first in-person lectures. We are also thankful to the Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute and Dr. Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali for their generous support of the Institute. At the outset, I'd like to express our solidarity with the inspiring movement in Iran, women's movement that still continues, and our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Lahore and Tehran Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. It has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River for thousands of years. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach on their ancestral homeland. I welcome Professor Dadi to the University of Toronto. My colleague Bilal Hashimi is introducing Professor Dadi and will moderate today's session. Bilal.
Thank you so much, Professor Tavakoli. Professor Dadi, thank you for gracing us with your presence. Iftikhar Dadi is the John H. Burris Professor in the Department of History of Art at Cornell University, where he currently also serves as chair. He teaches and researches modern contemporary art from a global and transnational perspective, with emphasis on questions of methodology and intellectual history. His writings have focused on modernism and contemporary art of South and West Asia and their diasporas. Another research interest examines the film, media, and popular cultures of South Asia, seeking to understand how emergent publics forge new avenues for civic participation. Publications include Lahore Cinema, Between Realism and Fable, University of Washington Press, 2022, a pioneering scholarly examination of mid-century cinema from Lahore, and the widely reviewed Modernism and the Art of Muslim South Asia, University of North Carolina Press, 2010. As an artist, Iftikhar Dadi works collaboratively with Elizabeth Dadi. Their work, which has been exhibited internationally, investigates questions of memory and borders in contemporary globalization and the productive capacities of urban informalities across the global South. Their practice draws on archaeology, cinema, art historical references, and critically engages with site specificity. Professor Dadi's presentation today, very much a work in progress, I'm told, is a testament to an abiding expertise in Iranian studies, a field in which he has published with distinction, in such areas as calligraphic abstraction and photography, and on key practitioners including Shirin Nishat and Charles Hussein Zendaroudi. Please join me in welcoming to the Institute, Professor Iftikhar Dadi.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being here instead of being outside on a nice day like this. And thank you so much to the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies for the invitation, and especially to its director, Mohammed Tavakoli, whose work was really eye-opening for me and has been very formative for me, and I've taught it in seminars as well. And it's been a real honor to meet him again after some time. And a deep note of thanks to Bilal Hashmi, who actually has been really a collaborator. So I'm presenting, but think of that is both of us presenting, okay? Because we actually worked on this together because we realized that we have a joint interest topic. So, and we hope to jointly develop this project further. So it's at a very initial stage. Um, so my interest with basically the relationships between South Asia and kind of the Persianate world is a long-standing one. So in the first book I wrote, which is the book on modernism in South Asia, I also looked at how the Persianate kind of cosmopolitanism, from the early modern era actually informs modern art practice as well, right? In places like Pakistan. And then this book, which I wrote recently, which was published in 2022, which is called Lahore Cinema Between Realism and Fable, also looks at basically, cinema that develops in Lahore, but is also entangled with other kind of cinemas with Bombay, but also with the kind of larger notion of a kind of a melodramatic realism, which combines kind of realism and fable, okay, and fantasy and kind of a notion of realism. So part of this presentation is sort of a spin-off from this book, but of course is the topic in its own right. So Shahscoping Lahore, and so we will explain what the title means. Okay, elective affinities in the era of regional cooperation and development. So regional cooperation and development is sometimes it's abbreviated as RCD. Okay, and I'll explain what that was. Okay, basically, in the early history of the relationships in the post-colonial era, because Pakistan becomes independent in 1947, is so you have the first trip of the Shah to Pakistan in 1950, and Iran is also the first country to recognize Pakistan. Its national anthem, Pakistan's national anthem, unveiled during the Shah's 1950 visit, is pretty much entirely in Persian except for one word. Okay, okay, and also the Shah continues to visit during the 60s as well, right? So there's a way in which you have this kind of press kind of clippings that also looks at Iran and its kind of natural resources and so on, oil and carpets and things like that. Okay. So there's a kind of a commercial kind of bent to this as well. Okay. Okay. Now, what happens is that you have pretty early on, and Pakistan becomes independent in 1947. Pretty early on, Pakistan signs up with the Americans in the Cold War context. Okay, so what you've got is there's an earlier treaty which is called CENTO, Central Asian. It's like a NATO basically. Okay, Central Asian, or sometimes also called the Baghdad Pact. Okay, but then in the mid 60s, you have this regional cooperation and development, which looks at three countries, okay, or which kind of in a sense is a regional cooperation pact between Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey. Okay, among its accomplishments are these cool-looking stamps that they used to issue. Okay, and it actually continued until 1979. Okay, at least on paper. Okay, okay, so it's and what you've got is so these are stamps issued by Pakistan. I presume also stamps were issued in Iran and as well as in Turkey at the same time. And they look at and each year there's a theme, right? So there's a theme which I selected the ones that deal with heritage and culture. Okay. And what you also have is this, kind of the kind of connections and relationships through kind of transport and travel that that are being kind of, let's say, forged, or that are being kind of brought under this RCD umbrella, right? And in some ways, Lahore is, if you look at Lahore of course is inland, so it's in some ways a city that's not that's kind of, based on land routes rather than, kind of sea routes. And in some ways, one can also think about Ghaznavid era of Lahore, which is, several centuries ago, which, and Sunil Sharma, who writes on this, he has a book called Persian Poetry at the Indian Frontier, right? He says, frontier societies or societies at the periphery of one cultural complex and adjacent to another have a special significance in the spread of Islamic culture, having served as outposts in a continuously expanding and dynamic socio-political phenomena. And being situated at the frontier, Lahore was neither wholly part of the Central Asian Iranian cultural complex, nor yet separated from the latter to become an Indo-Persian center. This is at that time, right? So in other words, if we are thinking about kind of this mid to later 20th century moment, it's also, I would argue, kind of haunted or informed, or perhaps, kind of in a sense, drawing upon these, these earlier relationships, even of course, it manifests in a kind of a new modern context, right? Okay, so part of this, part of the way we understand this also has to do with the fact that all three countries were in the American, in the Cold War, they are part of the American bloc, right? Basically, okay. And in the case of Pakistan, what you had was that you had wait. You had develop a kind of a fairly rapid economic and cultural development that took place from the mid 50s to really throughout the 60s. And much of it was under this the military dictator Ayub Khan, who ruled from 1958 to 1969. And it was of emphasis on capitalist industrialization, okay, and modernization. And the cinema and its audience were facing kind of new continuous structural changes, institutional changes, and also the number of film production was going up a lot, right? So this is a period already established trends in political economy and culture that the Ayub Khan government would build upon. So Pakistan was under the authoritarian rule from the very beginning, but during the 1958 through 69, there was a period of, there was a dictatorship period of a single ruler, and it was a fairly stable period until the end, where it becomes very unsettled. Okay. And it leads to 1971 with the breakup of the country with Bangladesh, East Pakistan becoming Bangladesh. So it was a time of centralization, of political stability, of rapid development of institutions, and generally bourgeois liberal values, right? So the fissures and contradictions of this period need to be underscored as filmmakers had to negotiate this matrix of constraints and possibilities. And there's a film scholar by the name of Mushtaq Gazdat. He says, the way which Ayub Khan maneuvered to assume total political control over the country is questionable, but his outlook towards economic and social reforms undoubtedly was modern and progressive. He was a tolerant person with a secular outlook. The censor board during his reign reflected the president's attitude, right? So there's this contradiction between kind of political authoritarianism and socially liberal values, okay, okay, and kind of elite liberal values that characterize the Ayub Khan era. So this is part of the Cold War context, and it's also evident in kind of reports that were issued during his era about the relationship that the state would play in relation to cinema. So one of the statements, for example, in the report says, while free enterprise must have its full play in the field, Pakistan cannot ignore the demands of a higher national interest. We have, after carefully considering the evidence placed before us and the example of the film industry of other countries, concluded that the stage has now reached when government must play its part in helping the development of the cinema industry and bringing it to a kind of atmosphere of security and reasonable prospects of commercial success. But actually, that was not really implemented. While the Ayub Khan era was unable to intervene much in the commercial film arena. What they did was they were very successful was in setting up a department of film and publications and producing actually short films, newsreels, and propaganda. A notorious work was a feature-length documentary glorifying Ayub Khan as the enlightened new savior at the beginning of his rule, which a critic has compared to Leni Riefenstahl's, okay. I haven't actually seen this film, which I couldn't find, but I'm very curious to, because, anyway. So, but basically it was glorifying his, his persona and his role, right? So by contrast, what happened with writers is that some of them, they also set up these writers guilds, right? There's a writers guild that was set up by Ayub Khan bureaucrat, the same person who wrote the screenplay for Kiran, okay? And many writers, including leftist writers, became associated with the Writers Guild, okay, because there was patronage and state support for the writers and prizes and so on that the state was promising. By contrast, the poet Habib Jalib emerges as an exemplary resistant figure during the 60s and beyond. Jalib characterized the Ayub Khan era as a terrifying period because he trampled over human rights and deployed all manner of anti-democratic measures. Jalib was a key participant in the film industry as well, writing lyrics for numerous films, and many of his songs based on his works have become widely popular. And the literary domain was thus a charged field during the 60s, cross-hatched by the political tensions. However, commercial cinema largely escaped coming under direct kind of ideological control. Okay? And it kind of remained apolitical in its response to the country's internal state of affairs. Apart from cinema being subject to the censor board, an arrangement that long predates the Ayub era, it continued to flourish as a popular entertainment in a kind of a bazaar mode. Okay. So now one of the very interesting cases that happens is actually this actress Nilo. Okay, so Nilo is an actress who was who the story goes was asked to dance for the Shah of Iran during one of his visits. Okay, and she refused. And in fact, she the press reports that she either took an overdose of sleeping pills or there was something about she did something to kind of in a sense and she became hospitalized, right? And so this is so this is some of her this is some of the press clippings, and this is another one, right? So which says there has been a lot of press about Nilo's suicide and her going insane. It took me a week to find the actual truth. Nilo did not take sleeping pills, okay, etc. Was asked to dance at a cultural show held in honor of the Shahscope of Iran, which she refused on the pretext that the notice was too short for her to rehearse and compose a dance. Okay. Now, Habib Jalib, whom I just mentioned, okay, what he does is that he writes this this poem, right, which is just making sure I'm not skipping anything. Yeah. So he writes this poem, okay, about this incident, okay, which is the original verse is that that you are unaware of the tenets of Shahenshai or imperialism, okay, and Saira-e-Shah mein is tarah jiya jata hai, or this is how you live under the shadow of the Shah, right? Okay, and so eventually this became a film about the Palestinian resistance, and this poem got used in a film in 1969 about the Palestinian resistance, basically a film loosely based on Leila Khalid, okay, and he actually the poem he altered, right? So he says, "Tu kina waqif-e azab-e ghulami hai abhi," right? So it's you are unaware of the tenets of slavery. You can also dance in fetters, right? So it's the same poet, okay? So we should play two clips. Okay, the second clip I'll play is a clip on the quick time player number 2. Okay. So this is the poem that is now picturized on this Leila Khalid figure, okay, who's being tortured by an Israeli general, okay, basically. Okay. 2. Okay. Now, Nilo had evidently been forced to dance for the Shah of Iran during his visits, and accounts of this incident were in wide circulation. I'll share now to the PowerPoint, right? To this one, right? Okay. Double click. Okay. The poet Habib Jalil himself viewed this incident in geopolitical terms, stating to Riyad Shahid, the filmmaker, that Nilo Begum had performed a major anti-imperialist role by refusing to dance for the Shah of Iran, who is the biggest police officer of US imperialism in this region. Okay. Characteristically, this comment situates melodramatic aesthetics with social critique. And I already mentioned the poem, the song that the poem that he modifies, for this film song. And this film song is actually really famous, right? And it's sung by a very famous ghazal singer, Mehdi Hassan, and it received really wide circulation far beyond the ambit of the film itself. So it's an incident that became a kind of a cause celebrate here. Okay, okay, right, okay. Now, as I mentioned, film production is continually increasing during this period, and what you have is that you've got kind of a massive production that is taking place. So the year saw a record production of propagandist documentaries in the country. These activities kept studios and labs busy around the clock. The future also, cinema also looked bright with so many elements enriching the world. CinemaScope was introduced. Okay, so we'll talk about, so keep CinemaScope in mind because we'll talk about Shahscope. Okay, in relation to this. Co-production with foreign producers was also undertaken, and film producers started to go abroad on location shooting. Okay, and artists from other countries were also invited to Pakistan. So now this producer, Mohsin Shirazi, was the first to set the ball rolling. He produced this film called Jaan Pehchan, which we talk about, inviting a renowned Iranian actress, Shahpara, to act opposite Pakistan's top-ranking leading man, Muhammad Ali. And it was shot by this director, Farid Ahmad, and it was part of it is set in these salt mines, okay, which have this kind of translucent walls. So apparently it was a theatrical setting, and they make a big deal of how difficult it was to shoot in that location. Okay. And Ali and Shahpara also fell in love during this, so there was an additional frisson, okay, in terms of this. Okay. Now, Jaan Pehchan is, okay. Start of a blazing, I'm reading some press clippings. Start of a blazing summer found the unit of Jaan Pehchan in the barren salt mines of Kyoda, the place where the salt mines are. When they moved for underground shooting, this was one of the highlights of the unit's outdoor performance. For the first time, a film concern was allowed to picturize the buried wonders of the salt mine. Lit up by dangerously high voltage studio lights, it was wonderful to observe colorful reflective effects presented by various shades of the salt walls. The color effect is perhaps recorded for the first time on cellular, in Eastman color and CinemaScope, which is just fabulous, and unimaginary otherwise. So now you see that how CinemaScope has become Shahscope, okay, over there. Okay. So what is this relationship between kind of, let's say, color, theatrical color, and then this term called the Shahscope, okay, tied to basically these joint co-productions of between Iran and Pakistan. Okay. So now this is the release. It's released in early 1967. It's usually released in South Asia. It's a kind of a common practice to release films on these festive days. So on Eid, there's a time for releasing films. Okay, so shooting was still going on in 1965, it's this. There's a lot of press hype about this film. Pre-release excitement says another milestone in the history of Pakistan film history, a landmark strengthening the brotherly love between Iran and Pakistan, the Iranian belle and the Pakistani Jawan, or the, Jawan, what's the youth is something, yeah. And cooperative efforts and co-productions between member countries of the RCD are welcome. The release of a widescreen and color Jaan Pehchan, which also happens to be a first such venture starring Muhammad Ali and the Iranian beauty, is awaited. And there is a slowdown and so on. Okay. So the film eventually gets released, right? And you even have this press, these press advertisements saying things like the unbreakable bonds of friendship between two nations emerges as a fabulous tale of love. Okay, under Shahscope. Okay, okay. But unfortunately, the film didn't do well. Okay, so the film is unfortunately not available. We haven't been able to. So part of the problem, you were showing me your very wonderful archives, and you have so many films online. And this was a real struggle when I was writing this book, because there are no official archives, and not even unofficial archives are really, So
Sophia is going to find it.
Okay. Maybe it's in Iran. So maybe it was dubbed in Farsi or something. I don't know. Okay.
So you mean that this film is not available?
We cannot find it. Yeah, we cannot find, because you see the celluloid is lost probably by now. So if it was transferred to VHS in the 1980s, then somebody will load it on YouTube or something, or I have a dealer in Karachi who will make me a DVD. But if it was never transferred on, because if it was most films that were failures were not actually transferred to DVD because they were not, or VHS. So then you don't have it, even though it might be. Even some films that I think are artistically good and would merit, being preserved are gone. So, so this is a big problem in terms of the way we do research, right? So, okay, so this one is, and people said things like, described later as a color and red CinemaScope film with a semi-secret agent and a routine Pakistani gimmicks and stereotype screenplay. Okay, so already the kind of critiques are mounting. Okay, and one of the ways we can think about Shahscope is also to think about André Bazin's critique of CinemaScope. Okay. Okay.
By the way, we found it Persian double.
Really?
Like that.
Really?
Oh my God. That's quite a achievement.
We'll look at.
Oh, okay. See, things are much better for you guys. Yeah, we have a song we can play, but we don't have. It's an audio. Okay, so basically, Bazin is, he's talking about the introduction of CinemaScope, which is actually earlier, right? It's in the 50s, right? And he says things like, everything then seems to indicate that a general deep and a priori weariness with the cinema on the part of the American public has found in television a visible means of manifesting itself. The viewer statistics are therefore all the more alarming, and they indicate that the hemorrhage cannot be checked through a mere cauterization, a CinemaScoping, as it were, of the wound made by television to the film industry. The widescreen will only hasten the adoption of the most modern of tendencies beloved in fine filmmaking, the stripping away of everything extrinsic to the quintessential meaning of the image, of all expressionism of time and space, etc. And he goes on. Okay. So now how did people, so Alamgir Kabir was a very sharp critic, and this is what he says about Jaan Pehchan, and he's quite scathing, right? So he says, thematically, the film must have been made an intelligent audience suffer the dilemma of whether to stay or walk out or stay in. It was like a fairy tale, or to be more precise and modern, like being in a nightmare. It was no crime thriller, but could have passed for a Kafkaesque satire had the director had the sense to call the whole thing a dream.
Mhm.
At least that would have made it more plausible. Instead, he tried to imitate quite unsuccessfully whatever crime thrill elements he could grasp from Hollywood and French spy thrillers. And so far as the co-production gimmick was concerned, it hardly contributed towards any discernible improvement in the standard. And then the critique of Chapard's performance is that the director just didn't know how to use a foreign actress with scanty knowledge of Urdu. And I think there's something very important in this critique, which is to say that, how would you collaborate across kind of actually, that there may be some sharing of kind of melodramatic and social elements in cinema culture, but of course there are two, you need some time and expertise and experience to kind of, in a sense, do co-productions, right? Or to bring kind of cinema cultures from, which haven't necessarily spoken to each other beforehand, right? So I think the critique is I think trying to get to something like that, right? Now, CinemaScope was already kind of, was developed earlier, so it arrives. So Shahscoping is actually quite late, right? I mean, it's like 67 and so on. Okay, and I don't know which genius thought of the kind of this, this term. Yeah. But of course, must be somebody, the producer or the ad agency. Okay. So the song is so there's a song which is very interesting because it's mutually intelligible in both Persian and okay. Now the title of the film is, the Urdu equivalent of the Persian word, Ashnai or Shinasai, but it doesn't, I guess, make sense in Persian, right? And there are two authors of, this is thanks to Bilal, authors of two Persian sources that discuss the film, Jamal Umid in Farhang-e Cinema-e Iran, and a 1994 article appearing in the pages of the film journal, Farhang-e Cinema. They misspelled the title. The other thing to, I think, keep in mind with this, with this film experiment is the libidinal economy of this film, right? So the tabloid interest in the romance between, Muhammad Ali, the actor, and Shahpara, who was born as Katayun Amir Ibrahimi in 1939. Okay, that is the name of her. 2 months after the shooting of the film started, they got engaged. And Muhammad Ali was also heard saying that the engagement was the first successful project of the RCD. Okay, but even that didn't last very long. Okay. I think even the stamps were, but even the marriage, the love was not, it didn't continue. They kind of fell out. So, okay. Okay. And Muhammad Ali even went to visit her when she moved to Tehran. Okay, but apparently it still somehow didn't work out. Okay. Okay. Now, yeah, so we looked at this. Okay. Now, with basically Jan Pehchan. Now, the one of the things I cover in this book is actually the deeper roots of how cinema emerges in South Asia, and especially in Bombay. Although, of course, Lahore is also an important center, and one of the ways it emerges is that it draws on theatrical conventions that develop from the mid 19th century onwards. So there is a genre of theater that developed from the 1860s onward, which is called Parsi theater. Okay, which was because the patrons were the Zoroastrian kind of business community. Okay, in Bombay. And it was theater done in a number of languages, including Urdu, but also in other languages. And you have the other important source for kind of early cinema is this opera, which is called Indar Sabha. Okay, which you see a page, the cover page from, and in Indar Sabha was written by Agha Hassan Amanat. Now, Agha Hassan Amanat, it was published in 1853. Okay, this play, this opera, and Agha Hassan Amanat descends from a family of Iranian immigrants who had moved to Lucknow in 1815. Okay, and so the first Urdu language play was commissioned in 1871, but then also this opera Indar Sabha. From the mid-19th century onwards, Parsi theater included songs as part of dramatic performance. The technological apparatus and various ruses employed in enhancing the theatricality of the Parsi theater would subsequently morph into magical effects in early cinema, rendered through editing and special effects. Several Parsi theater plays were made into films, including the Indar Sabha in 1931 as an early sound film. The theater scholar Catherine Hanson notes, Indar Sabha returned to its viewers a spectacular romanticized vision of its collective past. It facilitated the very production of spectatorship within the new environment of the public commercial theater. Even in the modern trappings of the proscenium arch, the figure of Indar, surrounded by his court of admiring beauties, constructed a visual icon that synthesized religious, erotic, and political modes of self-identification. So I think this kind of thinking about, these modes of self-identification, I think we can also think about in this, the cinema of the 60s and 70s. The implantation of the performative song and dance sequences before a picturized audience remained a defining feature of the narrative structure of Indian cinema. And that's very much part even today of, kind of what we call Bollywood. And one of the ways in which, Parsi theater, a lot of it is written in Urdu, and the appeal for Urdu was also, there were two reasons for the appeal of Urdu, right? The first was that Urdu was a trans-regional language in India, so that it could appeal to various communities, right? And the other is that it enabled playwrights to draw upon Urdu's vast repertoire of poetic and rhetorical resources in writing dialogues and songs. So much of Parsi theater is very dramatic, and Urdu poetic art and speech were highly esteemed. By adopting Urdu, the Parsi theater embraced more than a language or community. It gained an entire vocabulary of pleasure, and one that had the advantage of lacking a territorial boundary, right? And of course, Urdu draws a lot from kind of, let's say, in terms of its poetry, draws a lot from the Persian kind of world, right? So there's another way in which we think about cinema in South Asia, which is, highly informed by kind of the poetic and aesthetic resources of Urdu, right? Which continue to shape it till today. Okay. Okay. Now, there were all these films that were also shown that were kind of dubbed or, and brought over. So this is, let's see, we have, how much time do I have? Another 10 minutes or something? Yeah. 15. Okay, yeah. As much as. Okay. Okay. So, so this, Usian, right? Usian, yeah. Directed by Samuel Khian, 1966, a crime thriller dubbed in Urdu and released suggestively under the title Gunah or Sin in Urdu, was hailed as a great RCD achievement. Okay. Debates among critics about the film highlight how the crime film was able to thrive as a prestige form in the years before boundaries had solidified between commercial films and intellectual films made in Iran. Film noir, from its earliest transatlantic imaginations to its recent global circuits, has consistently engaged with an imagined elsewhere through its modernist style. And this is from Kaveh Askari, writing on the crime thriller in Iran. Right? And another quotation by him is, tracking lesser-known forms of globalization from small-scale informal circulation of celluloid to ambitious collaborations with foreign filmmakers means looking through archives that are dispersed, incomplete, and often incomplete. And that's from another study by Kaveh Askari, and this is thanks to Bilal for digging these up. And then you also had things like Sher-e-Iran, right? A critic says Sher-e-Iran is a crude commercial, and unless one has a passing interest in wrestling and similar physical sports, there is little point in seeing the film.
Iran is
It is the story of the loves of the wrestler. Okay. And but if you look at the there's a heavy emphasis on sex here. So a new kind of sexier thriller from Iran, full of action, thrills, sex, and suspense, with Iran's most sexiest dames. Okay. So I think that one can also not discount the libidinal kind of economies in the circulation. Okay. All right. Okay, also in 1970, the Iranian-Italian co-production Hashim Khan, okay, directed by Tony Zarandast, 1966, was shown in its English version. Shahpar's role in the film was used to advertise this film, even leading to a Shahpar week in an East Pakistani theater. Shahpar was similarly seen in the 1972 Iran-Turkey co-production Salahuddin Ayyubi, dubbed into Urdu and released in Pakistan the same year. Salahuddin Ayyubi from Iran was a real debacle and did not even recover the cost of the local version. Okay, this is from a critic in Pakistan. So now we talk about the last kind of significant co-production, which is Jane Bond 008. Okay, Operation Karachi. Okay, this we actually have. Okay, although I don't recommend seeing. Okay. So this is directed by an Iranian director, Raza Fazeli, and released in 1971. And it's released by Pak Iran Films, on that label. So produced by an Iranian producer in Pakistan and directed by the Iranian actor, with photography by an Iranian cameraman. The movie was made in Karachi. And what did the Pakistani efforts produce? Jane Bond 008 Operation Karachi. Say all the angry things against it, and you will not have done justice to the outrageously pedestrian fare that the movie is. Okay, the direction of the movie is routine. Raza Fazli seems to have been only sometimes oblivious to the fact that he was also the hero in the film. It is in these scenes and situations that the movie is all right. Otherwise, he sings and dances and pranks and prances around like Wahid Murad and Kamal, or two kind of popular Pakistani actors, and is worse for that. Okay. And then you see, and this one, the last one I like a lot. It says the film as a whole needs to be condemned, or else there will be films like Operation Tehran, Operation Lahore, Dhaka. And if friendly Turkey steps in, it will also have films like Operation Istanbul and so on.
Toronto.
I guess we should
Tehran to Operation Tehran.
We should begin. Okay. So let's look at a clip from a dance song. We'll stop here. so now in terms of the libidinal economy, okay, we can look also at the star text of the film actress Tarana, okay, maybe born around 1935, who is half Iranian, right? Who starred in Jaan Pehchan in several films of the 1960s, playing the westernized vamp and dancer or the rakasa in supporting roles. A kind of a foreign, so her kind of, let's say, her physique and body language is looked more westernized and in some ways she became kind of known for that way of, of comportment, right? So for example, somebody says 45-year-old Tarana has been the subject of perennial gossip in the social circles of Pakistan. Those connected with the Bombay film world in the pre-partition era would perhaps remember Tarana as a young starlet. Even in those days, Tarana was considered a sensation for her unorthodox behavior, belonging to a singing and dancing family of Agra. And, so basically it talks about things changed a great deal for her when her family migrated to Pakistan, where she had only a few lead roles, but found to her horror that her unorthodox behavior would not fit in the image of the heroines of the Pakistani state. She was reduced to play even the vamp role or act as a Saheli or Bhabi of the heroines, or kind of a friend or a sister-in-law to the. She was quite contented with her lot until Yahya Khan, the next military ruler, spotted her during one of his numerous visits to the Karachi television station in early 1975. So she's kind of dubbed as the Iranian actress. Her father was Punjabi, the mother was Iranian, and she spoke with an Iranian accent. She spent time in Iran, had some club dancer roles, and seems like she left to Iran in 1970. Okay, and after which we don't know what happened to her. So I'll quote another scholar, Ida Miftahi, Gender and Dance in Modern Iran, who says, in Iranian movements, the Rakkasa's body act as a palimpsest upon which the traces of myth of her quotidian life and the fantasies of the male-dominant society were projected, right? So this is another way, I think, if we think about the relationship with, with Iran or with modern Iran, definitely, you look at, for example, even the kind of, let's say, the star text for the physical and bodily comportment of the actress is freighted with certain associations, right? And that would also be true, I think, generally of the relationship between Iran and Pakistan, because Iran was, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and the impression was that Iran is a more westernized and a more modern and a more developed society, right? And so that's the kind of relationship I think that you see also fragments of or aspects of in this cinema. So let me end here. I know this is very much a kind of a rough, presentation and a work in progress, but it's at an early stage and would really benefit from your feedback and advice. And as I mentioned, this is owes a lot to Bilal's research and contribution. So we really should be seen as working on this together. Thank you.
Excellent. We look forward to reading it as an article for Cinema Ironica.
Great.
No, this is awesome. Pretty interesting.
So we have lots of time for questions.
Yeah.
Actually, Professor Dadi, if you could stop the share in case there's online questions.
Okay.
And then we can take them from there.
Yeah,
But starting from the room itself, very excited to get questions, comments.
Hi, Professor Dadi. My name is Donna Kim, and I study under Professor Tabakuri's supervision. So I'm really interested into the topic of suicide in modern Iran, and to me, Nilo's case was very interesting. So I wonder, whether it was very common way for them to express their rejection of be given oppressive situation, or was it very sensational even back then, back in like early 1960s?
Yeah, suicide is, there's also the gender aspect. Right? So, definitely her case became a big, because it got tied up to, basically there was a Pakistani, the Nawab of Taliban, who, who wants her to go and dance. And she refuses, and the press is that part of the press reports is that she tried to commit suicide. It's not that, I don't know if it's that common at that time, right? It's apart from suicides that may happen privately, right? They don't make it to the public. I'm trying to recall other cases in, let's say, in Pakistan in the 50s, 60s, 70s that might have been celebrity cases, and I can't think of anything right now.
But in Iran was Tahdi,
Okay.
Major Olympic
Okay.
sort of wrestler.
Yeah.
Companies.
Okay. And the reason being?
Complicated.
Very complicated. So it was supposed to be like family issue, but people thought he was like politically executed.
I see. Yeah.
To cover up that family issue.
And then Sadr Hidayat in 1930.
Yes.
But he put out good himself? No.
No, I can't recall. But for Nilo, what's interesting is that she does this, and then Habib Jalib writes this poem, and then in his interviews he says that the Shah is the biggest and he's the police, he's like the police chief of in this American police chief in this region. So he did a good thing by by this, and then it becomes part of this film later on in 1969, which is actually also a very celebrated film, which is about the Palestinian, loosely based on Elahé, but done in this kind of commercial. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I understood why Nilo refused to dance. But
yeah, so let's go back to this one, right?
Yeah, but politically also it was oriented, because then it's used for Palestinian solidarity later on, right? As a form of
the poem, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like surprised to see if her action was politically oriented or it was just.
It must have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was no reflection of such on the
Newspapers.
report that we see. Do
Yeah.
we? But it wasn't reported as such.
It was interpreted as such, and what's happening is that she soon marries Rhea Shahid, who's a politically oriented, right? So generally, what's happening is I think they're moving in with fellow travelers who are. There are also these Afro-Asian kind of meetings that are taking place in the mid-60s. Yeah. There is a kind of, even though Pakistan is very firmly at the state level is very firmly tied to the American umbrella,
like Iran.
Yeah. But at a kind of a more popular level, of course, there is, and people are also getting unhappy with the Ayub Khan's government, right? So some of that is, so some of that kind of energy. People also interpret that Zarqa, the film about the Palestine, it's not really about Elahé, it's about Pakistan. It's an allegory, right? So there is also an interpretation. So there's a way in which these people. So I'm not sure if Nilo was politicized at this point, but certainly after her marriage with Rhea Shahid, it's a very much. They are taking openly political stances. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your fabulous presentation, Mr. Dadi. I had a question. I was wondering how this erotic presence of women on the screen was received in Pakistan. and whether there was a difference between like how a Pakistani woman is being seen and criticized or talked about, let's say, in public,
Yeah.
in comparison with maybe an Iranian woman acting erotic on the street.
Yeah. I think some of it is, in these that body of Shahpara, right, and then the body of Tarana, right, and then also things like there is definitely a kind of let's say this new kind of sexiest thriller from Iran, full of action, thrill, sex, and suspense with Iran's most sexiest dames, right? So there is definitely a kind of a libidinal economy at work and an expectation that kind of, let's say I mean, one of the reasons you would go and see a film is that you would find you would have a kind of let's say you would see bodies on the screen that that were somewhat exotic.
But I think what is interesting about this question is the libidinal other.
Yeah.
That is, if it was a Pakistani woman on the screen in Pakistan, it would have a different impact and different reaction than an Iranian. An Iranian you will see and you dance with and you fantasize about. It's like Iranians watching Indian movies.
Yeah.
They can fantasize, but if there is an Iranian woman who does the very same thing, they may get very different.
Patriarchal honor is tarnished.
Precisely.
Yeah. There's that, but then also within Pakistani sort of actresses, there are also people who, there were people who were more, who were considered more, like even Nilo, she was considered the oomph girl. Oomph, like she had an oomph about her.
Yeah.
So there was a way in which she was more, like she was more, she would act in a way that was more bolder than perhaps other women.
And she used to embrace that she like claimed it, right?
And she claimed it, yeah.
Thank
you.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. I learned a lot. Looking forward to the finished project and reading further. I wanted to know, I had two questions. One of them was, we talked about these three countries. What are also Turkey, because Turkey had a good relationship cinematically with Iran, and that whether Pakistan also developed the same kind of relationship with Turkey, and whether there was the same thing that they had with Iranian actors going back and forth happened with the Turkish actors with Pakistan. So the second question is the notion of the other, as we talked, whether it also the projection of the Indian cinema went back and forth, and also the governments of the two countries promoted that kind of trying to steer away Pakistan from kind of its Indian heritage and bring it more toward its Persian heritage, rather. But it was something that both countries tried to do, or was it something organic that would happen? So I wanted to know whether it was more kind of because you showed how Shah at the beginning of the presentation, how Shah was in Pakistan, and whether that was something that governmental kind of getting close, people who spoke same language before the partition, and then getting Pakistan away from that Indian sphere kind of.
No, that's a good way to think about it also, because what happens with Indian cinema is that Indian cinema starts to, I mean, it's in direct competition with the emerging Pakistani, right? Because Bombay is such a big, film industry, and but so the Indian films start to get restricted and eventually banned. So by the early 60s, they are basically banned from showing in Pakistan, right? So that would be one factor. Now, of course, there is the governmental factor, which like at the high level, at the state level. But also, I think what's happening with, but also, there are of course, you have the Mughals, or the language of the Mughals, the court language is Persian at that time, right? So there's a long, I mean, some, parts of South Asia, they have a very long and kind of complicated connection with kind of the Persian influence, right? And but even at this time, there is one of the leading modernist poets, whose name is Noon Mim Rashid. He's actually posted as a diplomat, and he writes one of his poetic collection is a stranger in Iran, or Iran mein ajnabi, okay, being an ajnabi in Iran. So and we would like to know what was doing. I mean, was he involved in kind of furthering cultural kind of let's say developments that take place? There are also poets who write about. There are poets who write about. Faiz Ahmad Faiz writes about Iranian students, and then Zehra Nigah, who's a poet, she writes about the Iranian Revolution. So there are also, kind of Pakistani poets who are kind of, in a sense, aware of and commenting. But I'm not sure if there was a lot of traffic back and forth, in terms of the large numbers of people traveling. I'm not sure.
Pakistan, for the Iranian regime,
Yeah,
had an important legitimizing because it was the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and the Iranian clerics looked up to Pakistan as an Islamic state, and they, by developing closer relationship with Pakistan, Shah sort of was getting credit from the.
Oh, I see. So he could kind of show his religious...
Islamic, and rather than developing deeper relations with Pakistan, with India. Relations with Pakistan would sort of enhance his Islamic credentials.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. There's also other relations, like in among the Shia kind of, let's say theologians, home is an important place in terms of, right? So there were many South Asian scholars who would go and live and study in homes.
But it's also the Cold War, I think, is part of it.
This is very much a Cold War story. Yeah. And it's the state cannot, and the Cold War story also is that the state cannot make films, right? And in the sense that state can make newsreels, but then the commercial filmmaking should be left to the private sector. So, and then these guys try things, and then and I think they. I mean, what's interesting is that the collaborative experiments continued in Pakistan. So there was an actress called Shamim Ara, who was an actress, later on became a film director, and she made a lot of collaborative films with sometimes with Sri Lanka, sometimes with like looking eastward, so or with Thailand, I think, so she with Bangladesh even after 1971. So there's a lot of collaborate. So part of it is the exotic appeal, right? It's shot in either like Thailand or something, or Bangkok, and you see all the exotic Bangkok which you couldn't see otherwise. So, and then definitely what's happening is that from the late 70s onwards, there is a large number of, so from the late 70s or even like mid to later 70s, there is a massive migration of Pakistani working class and blue and white collar labor to the Persian Gulf, right? To the Emirates, to Saudi Arabia, for basically, so that also adds to. So there are also ways in which there are film cultures developing in those, in places like Muscat and places like Dubai, right, and which are kind of diasporic, and they're also bringing like Indians and Pakistanis and other people together.
So on Turkey, there was no back and forth.
Not that I know of. Okay. I don't know if
there was collaboration.
There was one
collaboration with Turkey too.
With Pakistan and Turkey.
No, Iran.
Of course, Iran. But I want to know, because they were the Central Treaty. I want to know whether there was also.
I remember seeing like Turkish songs on TV.
Wow.
Okay, on Pakistani television. So, like popular songs.
We have more time for questions. If I may, Iftikhar, I wanted to ask you about, in the context of your earlier work on calligraphic modernism abstraction, just going back to the elective affinities here in the title. how do you, I know it's a work in progress, but how would you compare those kinds of affinities between artists, let's say in Iran and Pakistan versus the cinema kind of?
Yeah, so in some of the work I've done in the past has looked at kind of modern art and development, and especially how modern artists, from really the 50s onwards, developed a kind of a relation of abstraction to kind of calligraphic practices, right? And this is very interesting because this happens by artists who are working in Pakistan, working in like the Sakra Khane artists, some of them in Iran, but then also in Sudan, right? And in Syria and Egypt and so on. So it's happening at it's pretty contemporary, right? And these people are not necessarily people who know each other, although sometimes they may go show in a gallery in Paris and they may be able to see each other's work. But for the most part, it's simultaneous, and I think this is a kind of like an elective affinity that develops, and I think that this has to do with problems in high art practice, right? And that's like if you're a studio artist, right, and you need to think about your practice you're informed by the school of Paris, Picasso and after, right? Of course, everyone is informed by Picasso and after. And but then you also need to think about your practice in relation to who you are. So I think it's a common predicament in which these artists like Ibrahim al-Salahi, who was from Sudan, that I've written about, Zandarubi, Sadatan, whom I've also written about. These were artists who developed a kind of like there are ways to think of them together. Okay? Despite the fact that it's not a school, right? So I call it calligraphic abstraction. That I've written on that. I think something like this, the more I think about it is, with Kaveh Askari's, this idea of the crime thriller, but also melodrama as a mode, right? I think the melodrama, the social film as a modality that gets to kind of, in a sense, thinking about, so melodrama are the private dramas of individuals, but then they also have an element like, I mean, somebody like Jameson would say what would be a national allegory, right? And you could push that further and say that it's really an allegory of thinking about the problems of modernity, basically, right? In the global south. I think you could think along those lines, perhaps. And to think about certain genres, like the crime film or the social film. I think more comparative work needs to be done. When I was writing this book, a colleague of mine said, "Why are you looking at Bombay? Why don't you look at Turkish cinema, which had kind of a similar?" And I would have liked to do that comparative work, but I didn't have enough time, and because I didn't know a thing about Turkish cinema. So, but I think it's a suggestive, in the sense that Turkish commercial cinema at that time, were they also dealing with similar? Were they also dealing with similar modalities in which you take the private affairs of a family or a group of people, but then you stage it and stage it, in this kind of
also Egyptian
and Egyptian as well,
Egyptian, Iranian,
and Iranian probably, And these would all be countries that would be certainly for Turkey and Iran. That would be, I think the pro-American, because that also implies a certain relationship of the state to popular culture, right? So the state doesn't really want to get into popular culture that much in these pro-American regimes.
Well, what is known as film farsi is really displaying the private family disputes, putting it on the stage. The deepest structure of it is family feuds.
And who's funding and patronizing?
These are private.
But
become very successful because unlike Western movies, this sort of taps into the Iranian mode of life, family disputes, things that are very familiar. So the ticket sales go really well.
They go,
But then the elites start criticizing these movies, like the whole part, the let's say, high modernist era. just like criticizing the drama.
Oh yeah, in Pakistan they are scathing, that this is all trash, and this is. I quote some of those.
Vulgar.
This is corrupting or people like stuff like that.
Film Farsi basically means Persian trash.
Yeah. And one of the arguments I make is that film was too trashy for the state to even, like, they couldn't even, like, they said, okay, we'll improve standards. Okay, so how the film report said, oh, we have to do something because the film is important medium, it should remain in private hands, but we should help them to improve standards. So they said things like, okay, we'll set up training institutes, we'll set up like a BFI, British Film Institute type of, film clubs, and, we provide loans and, equipment and technical training, but they never did any of that. Okay. So whereas the writers, they tried to bring into this writer's guild. Right? So in literature, which was not seen to be trashy, right? They tried to organize it to some level, but they couldn't do it, or they didn't even try it in the case of cinema. They produced their own newsreels, but Mushtaq Ghazdar said it became such propaganda that people. So I remember because the movie was a 3-hour slot, because like Indian Pakistani movies are very long, but before before they would play 20 minutes of this pictorial newsreel, which would show the leader going and opening a dam or a hospital or meeting foreign leaders. So people would come 20 minutes late to the, because they just did. So it became a kind of, so that's what the state produced, or documentary, educational documentaries, things like that, but not a commercial films.
Film Farsi was also called the two-part movie genre.
Huh?
Two-part movie genre. The Film Farsi in Iran was called.
Yeah.
Film of Rushdie. How can you say that?
So were they also state-led, because in India there was actually what is called a parallel cinema, right? So there was commercial films, but there was also a state-led initiatives that provided funding for more serious and artistic movies.
Those artistic movies were children's movies.
In Iran?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The films that produced it was state-sponsored, not private enterprise.
Okay.
So it started as being state-sponsored, and then it turned...
and it became progressive.
It became progressive.
So. Yeah. That happens in the case of television, in fact. So what happens with television is that television dramas become very, they have, they're also kind of, let's say, stereotyped, and they stay within certain limits, but they basically talk about the problems of feudalism or women's oppression or, things like that, class divisions. So they tackle it more, but still in that kind of TV drama mode.
But I hope they didn't become like representational. Because in Iran, the new wave and the new wave movies, the elite movies sort of become so representational of the subaltern.
Okay.
And I guess that's like one of the fissures of this elite culture that tries to
now. Okay. But what about, but now you have all these, all the Mahmoud and, all the, the Iranian cinema post-revolution, that's supposed to be the high cinema, right? Right. But that's state-funded.
Mahmoud was one of the state-funded.
Yeah. But even before the revolution, or?
This is during the war.
If you're talking about post-revolution, with Mahmoud, he was he was pro sort of revolution and everything, and he was very religious.
Okay.
So if there are
some countries have restrictions on the number of American Hollywood films that can be shown in cinemas.
Yeah.
Were there any restrictions like that in Iran or Pakistan? Like on subtitles or dub films, any restrictions?
In Pakistan, a lot of Americans films were shown. I don't know if there were restrictions. I mean, I grew up watching westerns and James Bond and Guns of Navarone, like World War II, things like that. I mean, those were big, and a lot of B and C films.
Tehran was a heaven for Hollywood movies.
And when did television become widely available in Pakistan?
By the 70s, it's pretty, I mean, it starts 60s, 64. But, I remember in my family, we didn't get a TV. We were like upper middle class, and we didn't get a TV till like 68, 69 years. So I think, in the beginning, it's not that, but even sometimes like it may be in a restaurant, right? Or in a popular cafe or something, and people, so you may not own it, but you may still be exposed to it because you're, in this public, and then it spreads more.
In a coffee house.
Yeah. And then some of the more socially conscious writers, they gravitate to writing for television.
So I think we have to call it a day. Thank you very much, Iftikhar, and thank you everyone for attending, both here in person and online. We greatly look forward to seeing this in print. And thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for this inspiring presentation and leading us really the project that we have to move beyond just Iranian cinema and look into the collaboration. We have had work on Iranian, India and Iran, and with the Pakistani Iranian projects. I think it's a really well placed contribution.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you all.